The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 9th chapter. About 8 days after Jesus had said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter didn't know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Do you mind switching to the next slide for me? Thanks. So it's kind of exciting. 3 weeks ago, I was standing on the mountain that this story that we heard about in our gospel today was reported to have taken place. Mount Tabor. It's the highest mountain in a range of mountains in the Gilead, up in the plain of Sharon, and it's about 5,000 feet, if you can imagine, above sea level. And when we hear in this story that the disciples became afraid when the cloud surrounded them, I very much relate to that. Because after we had taken our taxis, our chariots up to the top of Mount Tabor, a storm rolled in. And we were standing on the top of the mountain with the clouds literally surrounding us. And we could see off in the distance lightning. And the wind started to come up. And we were in a full run to the church on Mount Tabor. And the voice that came to me said, "What are you doing up here right now?" It's a riveting experience to be on Mount Tabor, to reflect on this experience of what it means to look upon the face of God. You know, it's a fascinating story, this story of the transfiguration, the changing of Jesus' appearance before his disciples. And it had a very particular reason. But before we go into the story anymore, I want to just say a little bit more about this image that's on the screen, this illumination that was on the screen as you gathered this morning. I know some of you were kind of allowing yourself to have some time and space to gaze upon it. And it's kind of interesting, if you let your eyes go a little bit out of focus, maybe squint a little bit, something starts to happen with this illumination. I'm not going to prescribe it to you, but I know I've had that experience. As I look on this illumination that's in front of you is the illumination for the Transfiguration that comes from the St. John's Bible. And this is one of 7 volumes of the Bible that was completed in the year 2011. It was a Bible that was commissioned by the monks of St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, to honor the 1500th birthday of their founder, St. Benedict, and also the millennium. And what they did is they conscribed a group of 11 artists, all living in Wales, to put illuminations, pieces of original art, to a calligraphied Bible, all hand done in the medieval style. What that means is, if you remember the invention of the printing press, almost about the same time that Luther began the Reformation, he used the printing press to share a lot of his information. That was the end of the hand-done Bibles, the ones that were done with script on vellum, on calfskin, with inks and quill feathers. This Bible was done in that same method, and it was done to honor the long tradition of the Word among us. It took 14 years for them to complete this project and $12 million. And the original Bible is now on display up at St. John's, if you ever get up in that area. The reason why I think it's significant is because these illuminations, which, if we were gazing upon the original, is covered with gold leaf. Illumination means the reflection of light, illuminatio. The reflection of light. And the whole point of using precious metals to reflect the light to the viewer is to draw you in. So just imagine if you were standing in front of this original, which is about this big, and you were standing in front of that gold leaf, what would you see reflected in it? Who would you see reflected in it? If there's enough gold, you see your own face. It's an interesting way to pray with this art, to think, how am I drawn into this art? Where am I in this image? Now, in this story, as you gaze upon this, maybe you see some of these aspects of the story of the Transfiguration played out in front of you. The two men, obviously standing before the image of Jesus, gesturing to him, Elijah and Moses, the fulfillment of the law and the prophets who were pointing to Jesus, to re-emphasize what that voice said to his disciples. But let me ask you, who went up the mountain with Jesus that day? Peter, James, and John, those three, that triumvirate, that kind of the leaders of that pack of disciples. Where are they in the illumination? Can you see them? They're actually symbolized by three very small gold rings at the bottom. Those are halos. And gold in illumination symbolizes divinity, divine power, the presence of God. How are James, John, and Peter represented in this image? They are at the foot of the stony cliff, gazing upon the Transfiguration. And so let me ask you, where are you in this illumination? Sitting with Peter, James, and John, gazing upon the Transfiguration of our Lord. We have the same perspective as his disciples. Why is this important? Why was this event crucial to the ministry of Jesus? Let's remind ourselves what's taken place immediately before this. Jesus had taken his disciples up into the pagan region of Philippi, and he had asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And they said, "Oh, maybe you're a prophet. Oh, maybe you're John the Baptist. I don't know. People are saying that, you're kind of amazing. You're doing lots of great works." And then Peter says, "You are the Messiah. You are the Messiah of God, the anointed one of God, who has been sent to lead us into the kingdom." And Jesus says, "Shh." Why? Because the term Messiah was loaded. They thought that he was going to be the Messiah who led an army to overthrow the Romans, to free them from oppression. But instead, what did they get? As they're leaving Philippi, walking down the road, Jesus says to them, By the way, you guys, my disciples, my followers, my students, you see these crosses along the road? Yeah, that might become part of your reality. Because people are going to hate us. People are going to dislike us. People are going to rebel against us. People are going to threaten us. People are going to disown us. They may even kill us. They're definitely going to kill me. I'm going to Jerusalem. And when we get to Jerusalem, I will be leaving you because they will kill me for my message of love and compassion and forgiveness. You are going to face some of the same perils. Are you with me? Can you imagine what they're thinking and feeling that day as they're walking down the road? Holy cow, who's this guy we backed? Who did we throw our lot in with? We thought he was going to be this powerful leader, and he's telling us he's going to Jerusalem to die? That's not how I thought this was going to turn out. And now he's telling me if I go with him, I might be asked my life too. I might have to give everything away. Whoa, that might be just too much, Jesus. And so what happens at this point? They're filled with doubt, with fear, with confusion. Has that ever happened to you in your spiritual life? Do things ever happen to you that make you doubt God's presence, make you wonder about God's love, about God's forgiveness? Then you are at the mountain with Peter, James, and John, asking God, what next, God? How am I going to make a decision now, God? Are you with me, God? I don't know what to do. And so Jesus takes them up a mountain, up to the highest peak, because they believed that God was out there. And the best way to get to God out there is to go up there and to get a little closer, to have an encounter, to have communion. And while they're up there, we're told that Peter, James, and John were incredibly sleepy, burdened with the weight of their doubt and confusion, not seeing clearly what is going to happen, what's next, who are they with this Jesus, what kind of Messiah is he? And then we're told they come fully awake. And what do they see when they come fully awake? The face of Jesus transfigured. Still looking like them, but radiant with the presence of God. And his clothes become dazzling white so that they can't even look at them. And that's what I was saying, if you squint a little bit, the way they represent that transfiguration here, sometimes it almost looks like it's shimmering, like it's moving. There's a movement inside of that. This figure of Jesus who is moving in front of them, radiant with the Shekinah of God, with the glory of God. And what they believed is that if you looked on the glory of God, surely you would die. But instead, they gaze upon the glory of God and they see the reference to him from Moses and Elijah, and they are told that baptismal revelation, this is my beloved Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. If they needed any encouragement, if they needed any strength, it was to listen to the one whom they followed. And then Peter, in his dismay, says, let's stay here, Jesus. We can build a church. This will be awesome. But Jesus says, no, Peter, you don't know what you're saying. We have to go to Jerusalem. There, the full revelation of God's love will be revealed to the people. The glory of God will shine forth from the cross and from the temple. And if you remember, that veil was torn from top to bottom. And it's the same veil that's referred to in that first reading regarding Moses. You know, when Moses came down off Mount Sinai with the tablets, with the commandments, the people could not handle it. His face was radiant with this encounter with God and with the truth of his commandments. And what did they do? They ran away from him. And so Moses says, I tell you what, I will put a veil over my face, and then you can approach me, and I'll give you the commands. Isn't that like us so often? Aren't we like the Israelites when we're in the face or in the presence of somebody who has encountered God, who is radiant with the love and the presence of God? We shy away. We turn away. It's too much for us. It's too hard for us to believe that we're worthy of God's love. After all, shouldn't that person have died when they confronted God, when they encountered God, when they had communion with God? And no, Moses comes down and says, no, our God is not a God of death. Our God is a God of life. You see those Arab men with the keffiyehs wrapped around their heads. It's easy to imagine that Moses just pulled his veil up when he talked with the people. And he did that, why? Because so often we have to veil ourselves from the truth because it's too much for us to accept. We have to protect ourselves, or we have to guard the mystery. But what Jesus says, just as Moses revealed when he took that veil away, and when Jesus in his death tore that veil from top to bottom, is that there is no fear in facing our God. There is no fear in approaching our God and asking to see the glory of our God. There is no fear in the face of our God. And you know, I love the way St. Paul puts that in that second reading from 2 Corinthians. And I want to share it with you from actually the New Revised Standard Version. I love the translation because it puts an image in front of me that I want us to reflect on, no pun intended, during the season of Lent as we're going forward. Paul says this to us. Now the Lord is the Spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, no fear. And all of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. The reason why I think that's fascinating is because here's what I'm thinking about. The invitation that you and I, just like Peter, James, and John, just like Jesus, are being transfigured, are being transformed day after day, glory after glory, prayer after prayer, meal after meal, sign of peace after sign of peace. We are being transfigured by the same power that transfigured our Lord Jesus on Mount Tabor that day. We are being transformed by the same power that calls us through baptism to be the presence and the voice of God in the world, to call people to be transformed. Do you believe that? Do you believe that you are being transformed into the glory of God? I want to invite you sometime during this Lent, maybe daily, when you gaze into the mirror, look at your own face. See the radiance of God that pours through you, that transfigures you, that transforms you. Let that love and compassion of God pour through you in a radiant way to those who encounter you. See it in yourself and believe that others see it in you too. The disciples were told to listen to Jesus. You and I are invited to listen to Jesus. Our table talks through this season of Lent and into June are opportunities for us to listen to Jesus through each other in that same Spirit that transforms us individually and us as a church. Come, let us listen to the voice of God.